I've always considered myself a compassionate person. You know, the type who'd go out of their way to help someone in need. But after what happened to me, I'm not so sure anymore. It's not that I don't want to help people. It's just, well, let me start from the beginning. It was a chilly October evening, and I was driving home from work. The sky was already dark, streetlights casting an eerie glow on the empty roads. I needed to fill up my car, so I pulled into the gas station just off the highway. It was one of those places that seemed to exist in a bubble of its own, a harsh fluorescent oasis in the middle of nowhere. As I was finishing up at the pump, I decided to grab some snacks for the rest of the drive. The bell chimed as I entered the convenience store, and the bored cashier barely looked up from his phone. I quickly grabbed some chips and a soda, paid, and headed back to my car. That's when I saw him. He was just standing there near my car. A man, probably in his mid-40s, with a weathered face and clothes that had seen better days. He wasn't doing anything threatening, but something about his presence made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way his eyes seemed to lock onto mine, or how still he was standing in the cold night air. "Are you okay?" I called out, my hand tightening around my car keys. He blinked, as if coming out of a trance. I'm hungry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help." I felt a pang of sympathy. Who knows what circumstances had led this man here? "Hold on," I said. "I'll get you something warm to eat from the store." I turned back towards the convenience store, my mind already on what I could quickly grab for him. But when I looked over my shoulder to ask what he'd like, he was gone. Vanished. I spun around, searching the parking lot, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Shaken, I got into my car and drove home, not understanding why the man had left when I was just about to help him. A few days later, I started feeling off. Just tired at first, like I was coming down with a cold. But it got worse. Fast. No matter how much I slept, I felt exhausted. My body ached, and I had this constant feeling of heaviness, like I was moving through water. I went to the doctor, of course. They ran tests, checked for everything from mono to thyroid issues. Nothing. They told me it was probably stress, that I should take it easy for a while. But I knew this was different. This wasn't just being overworked or run down. This was something else. Weeks turned into months, and I could barely function. Getting out of bed became a monumental task. I had to take a leave of absence from work because I couldn't stay awake for more than a few hours at a time. My friends were worried, but I could see the doubt in their eyes when I tried to explain how I felt. They thought it was depression, maybe, or that I was exaggerating. It was my Aunt Sarah who finally figured it out. She came to visit from the next town over, and the moment she walked into my apartment, she froze. Aunt Sarah had always been different, more attuned to things others couldn't see or feel. As a kid, I thought it was cool. As an adult, I wasn't so sure. "Lisa," she said, her face pale, "you're not alone here." I laughed weakly. "What do you mean?" "It's just me." But Aunt Sarah shook her head, her eyes darting around the room. "No, honey. There's something here with you. Something feeding off you." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" She sat down next to me on the couch, taking my hand in hers. "When did this start?" "Think carefully." And that's when it hit me. The gas station. The man who disappeared. I told Aunt Sarah everything, watching as her expression grew more and more grave. "Oh, Lisa," she whispered. "You invited it in." Over the next few hours, Aunt Sarah explained what she believed had happened. The entity at the gas station, it wasn't really a man, at least not anymore. It was something that preyed on the kindness of others, attaching itself to those who showed it compassion. And I had offered to help it. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell Aunt Sarah she was being ridiculous. But I couldn't. Because deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew she was right. Aunt Sarah didn't waste any time. She called an old friend of hers, a woman named Elena, who she said could help. Elena arrived the next day, her arms full of herbs and crystals that made my apartment smell like a new age shop. What happened next? I'm still not sure I believe it, even though I was there. Elena walked through my apartment, muttering under her breath in a language I didn't recognize. The air seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. And then, for just a moment, I saw it. A shadow darker than the darkest night, hovering over me. I could feel its hunger, its desperation. And then Elena shouted something. There was a flash of light, and it was gone. I'd like to say I felt better immediately, but recovery was slow. It took weeks before I started to feel like myself again. Even now, months later, I still have moments where I feel that old exhaustion creeping back in. I don't stop at that gas station anymore. In fact, I avoid it completely, taking a longer route home if I have to. And while I still consider myself a compassionate person, I'm more cautious now. Because sometimes the people or things we try to help aren't what they seem. And sometimes kindness can come at a terrible cost. If you are enjoying it, please consider subscribing and clicking the like button to support my channel. I never imagined that moving to a quiet suburb would lead me down a path of unexplained phenomena. My name is James, and I'm just an ordinary accountant who wanted to escape the chaos of city life. This old house, with its wooden walls and the scent of lavender from the garden, seemed perfect. At first, it started with a cold spot near the fireplace in the living room. I tried to brush it off as a draft, but something about it felt different. Every time I passed by, a shiver ran down my spine, and an inexplicable feeling of sadness washed over me. As days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly drawn to that spot. I'd catch myself standing there, lost in thought, feeling as if I was on the verge of remembering something important. But what? I had no history with this house, no childhood memories tied to this place. One evening, while working late on some financial reports, I decided to set up my laptop near the cold spot. I thought maybe prolonged exposure would help me figure out what was going on. As I worked, I felt the temperature drop even further. My fingers grew numb as I typed, and my breath came out in visible puffs. Suddenly, my screen went black. Frustrated, I reached for my phone to use as a flashlight, only to find it completely drained. The darkness felt oppressive, almost alive. That's when I heard a soft, muffled sobbing coming from somewhere behind the wall. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, a gentle tug on my sleeve made me jump. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. Over the next few days, I threw myself into researching the house's history. I spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and property records. What I found chilled me to the bone. In the 1920s, a family had lived here, parents with two young children. The youngest, a boy named Thomas, had gone missing during a harsh winter. He was never found. The family moved away shortly after, unable to bear the memories. Armed with this knowledge, I approached the cold spot with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Thomas?" I whispered, feeling slightly foolish. "Is that you?" The room grew cold again, and I swear I felt a small hand slip into mine. It lasted only for a moment, but it left me with a profound sense of sorrow and a strange determination to help. I began leaving toys near the cold spot: a small rubber ball, a toy car, things a young boy might like. Sometimes I'd find them in different positions when I returned home from work. Once, I even heard the faint sound of childish laughter echoing through the house. But it wasn't all gentle encounters. Some nights, I'd wake up to the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor downstairs. When I'd investigate, heart in my throat, I'd find furniture moved, as if someone had been searching for something. One particularly cold night, I woke to find my bedroom door wide open, a trail of wet, child-sized footprints leading from the cold spot to the foot of my bed. I followed them back downstairs, but they vanished at the edge of the living room rug. I've thought about moving out countless times, but something keeps me here. Maybe it's the accountant in me, needing to balance the books to solve this mystery. Or maybe it's something more: a connection I can't explain, but feel compelled to explore. So here I am, still in this house with its cold spot and its secrets. I've learned to coexist with the unexplained, to find a strange comfort in the cool touch of unseen hands and the whisper of footsteps in empty rooms. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what's happening here, but I know I can't leave. Not yet. Not while there might be a lost child who needs help finding his way home. I was never one to believe in the supernatural, but what happened to me in that hotel completely changed my perspective. It all began when I arrived in that small town for a business trip. It was late at night, and I was exhausted after hours of driving through winding country roads. The hotel was one of those old places, with a faded charm that you only find in small towns. Its Victorian architecture loomed against the night sky, the paint peeling in places, giving it an eerie appearance. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a tired smile and deep-set eyes, handed me the key to room 237. "It's on the second floor, dear. The elevator is broken, but the stairs are right over there," she said, pointing to a dimly lit corridor. As I dragged my suitcase up the creaking stairs, I couldn't shake off an uneasy feeling. The scent of mold and old wood filled my nostrils, and the floorboards groaned under my feet as if protesting my presence. The second floor hallway was too quiet, almost as if it absorbed any sound. The wallpaper, once probably elegant, now hung in tatters in places, revealing glimpses of the bare walls beneath. I found room 237 at the end of the hallway. The brass numbers on the door were tarnished, and I had to jiggle the key a bit before the rusty lock finally gave way. The door swung open with a low, drawn-out creak that sent shivers down my spine. The room was simple, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a desk. Nothing out of the ordinary at first glance, but there was something off about it. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive. I put my suitcase down and collapsed onto the bed, hoping to fall asleep quickly. That's when I noticed something strange on the headboard. There were words scrawled on the wood, almost imperceptible in the dim light. I turned on the bedside lamp and leaned in to read, "Leave while you can." A chill ran through me, but I tried to convince myself it was just a tasteless joke from a previous guest. Still, I couldn't help but feel watched. Trying to shake off the feeling, I decided to take a quick shower. The bathroom was small and dated, with cracked tiles and a leaky faucet that dripped steadily. As I stood under the lukewarm water, I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from the other side of the shower curtain. But when I peeked out, the bathroom was empty. When I came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a threadbare towel, I had a distinct feeling that someone had been in the room. Nothing was out of place, but the air felt different, even heavier than before. That's when I noticed another message, This time scrawled on the foggy mirror, "They come at night." My heart started racing. I looked around, searching for hidden cameras or any sign that this was an elaborate prank. I found nothing. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows in the corners growing deeper. I sat on the bed, trying to calm myself, when I heard a sound coming from the desk. It was like someone was scratching the wood. Slowly, I approached and, horrified, saw words forming on the surface of the desk, as if an invisible hand was writing them. "You were warned." The wood splintered slightly as each letter appeared, and I could smell a faint scent of burning. At that moment, the lights began to flicker, casting strange shadows on the walls. I heard children's laughter echoing through the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath misting in the air. The laughter grew louder, and I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. When I turned, I caught a glimpse of a small figure darting into the closet. But that was impossible. The closet door was closed. Panic overtook me. I grabbed my suitcase and ran out, not bothering to change out of my towel. As I fumbled with the door, I felt cold fingers brush against the back of my neck. I stumbled down the stairs, the children's laughter following me all the way down. The receptionist looked at me in shock as I bolted across the lobby, my wet feet slapping against the worn carpet. I ran out into the parking lot, the cool night air raising goosebumps on my damp skin. I spent the night in my car, trembling with fear and cold. Every shadow seemed to move, and I jumped at every sound. As dawn broke, I realized I had left most of my belongings in the room. Gathering my courage, I returned to the hotel as the sun rose. A new receptionist, a young man with a puzzled expression, was at the desk. When I mentioned room 237 and the strange occurrences, he looked at me confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have a room 237. The second floor has been closed for renovations for years." My blood ran cold. I insisted on checking, and he reluctantly accompanied me upstairs. Where room 237 had been, there was only a blank wall. My belongings were nowhere to be found. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. But one thing is certain: I never ignore warnings anymore, no matter how strange they may seem. And I always check hotel reviews before booking a room in an old building. It began innocuously enough. That Tuesday morning, I noticed a purple bruise on my left arm. Nothing to worry about, I thought. We all get unexplained bruises sometimes, right? But as days passed, more marks appeared on my legs, my back, places I couldn't possibly have bumped or injured. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, so I did what any sensible person would do. I went to my doctor, Dr. Thompson, a no-nonsense woman I've trusted for years. "Let's run some tests," she said, her brow furrowed. "Could be a vitamin deficiency or a reaction to medication." The tests came back normal. Every single one. Meanwhile, the marks kept appearing, more frequently, and in increasingly bizarre places. I started to dread going to sleep, wondering where the next bruise would show up. It was affecting my work, my relationships. My girlfriend, Sarah, tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Maybe you should see a sleep specialist," she suggested one evening. "You could be hurting yourself in your sleep." It seemed far-fetched, but I was desperate for an explanation. So I set up a camera in my bedroom. The next day, my hands shook as I rewound the footage. For hours, nothing unusual. Just me, sleeping peacefully. Then, at 3:17 a.m., the image distorted, like someone had messed with the signal. When it cleared, my blood ran cold. There, clear as day, was a fresh mark appearing on my arm, as if an invisible hand was grabbing me. I replayed the footage countless times, looking for any explanation. A trick of the light, a malfunction in the camera, anything. But there was no denying what I saw. That's when other things started happening. I'd wake up gasping, feeling like someone had just called my name. Other times, I'd jolt awake, a crushing weight on my chest making it hard to breathe. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Sleep paralysis, maybe? But deep down, I knew it was something else. I tried everything. I moved apartments, thinking maybe it was something in the building. I sage-smudged the new place, despite feeling ridiculous doing it. I even went to a psychic, something I would have scoffed at just months ago. Nothing helped. The marks followed me. The sensations intensified. I was a wreck surviving on caffeine and fear. My coworkers started to whisper. I caught concerned glances from my boss. But how could I explain what was happening without sounding completely insane? One night, after days of hardly sleeping, exhaustion finally won out. I passed out on the couch, too tired to even make it to bed. I jolted awake, that familiar sensation of being watched crawling up my spine. My eyes darted to the mirror across the room, and for a split second, I saw it. A dark figure looming behind me, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. I blinked, and it vanished, but the image was seared into my mind. I'd like to say that was the end of it, that I found some explanation or solution. But the truth is, I'm still living it. The marks still appear. I still wake up feeling watched, feeling touched by unseen hands. I've learned to function, to paste on a smile, and pretend everything's normal. But every night, as I lay down to sleep, I wonder what will happen this time. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, some days I'm not sure I believe it myself. But I know what I've experienced. And I know that there are things in this world that defy explanation, that shatter our comfortable assumptions about reality. It started as a typical weekend of sorting through Gran's belongings. She had passed away a month ago, leaving behind a house full of memories and mysteries. The attic was my last stop, a dusty time capsule filled with forgotten treasures and family heirlooms. As I rummaged through a weathered cardboard box, my fingers brushed against a stack of old photographs. Curious, I pulled them out, expecting to see familiar faces of long-gone relatives. Instead, I found myself looking at a young woman who could have been my twin. The resemblance was uncanny, the same almond-shaped eyes, the high cheekbones, even the slight quirk of her smile. But the clothes and hairstyle were decidedly from another era, perhaps the early 1900s. On the back, in faded ink, was written, Elizabeth, 1906. A chill ran down my spine. I had always known my family had deep roots in San Francisco, but I'd never seen this photo before. As I flipped through more images, I noticed something strange. In each one, Elizabeth seemed to be looking directly at the camera, her eyes holding an intensity that felt almost alive. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to my overactive imagination and the dusty attic air. But as I continued to sort through the box, more oddities emerged. There were newspaper clippings about the 1906 earthquake, with Elizabeth's name mentioned as a survivor. Old letters hinted at a secret society she belonged to, one that believed in communicating with the past. As night fell, I found myself unable to tear away from these fragments of history. The attic seemed to grow colder, and I could have sworn I heard the faint strains of an old gramophone playing somewhere in the distance. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe a neighbor's radio. But then, as I held up another photo to the light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the background, barely visible, was a figure that looked just like me, dressed in my modern clothes, staring back at Elizabeth. I dropped the photo, my heart pounding. This couldn't be real. Yet as I looked around the attic, the shadows seemed to shift and dance, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw Elizabeth herself standing in the corner, her eyes locked on mine. I scrambled backwards, nearly tripping over a pile of old books. My breath came in short gasps as I tried to rationalize what I'd just seen. It had to be a trick of the light, or my tired mind playing tricks on me. But as I gathered the courage to look again, the corner where I thought I'd seen Elizabeth was empty. With shaking hands, I gathered the photos and documents, shoving them into my bag. I needed to get out of that attic, to clear my head and make sense of what was happening. As I reached for the attic door, the old floorboards creaked behind me. I froze, my hand on the doorknob, afraid to turn around. "Sarah?" A voice whispered, so faint I could barely hear it. It sounded like my name, but with an old-fashioned lilt to it. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The attic was empty, moonlight streaming through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the floor. I practically flew down the stairs, not stopping until I was out of the house and on the sidewalk, gulping in the cool night air. The street was quiet, the familiar San Francisco fog rolling in, muffling the distant sounds of traffic. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread the photos and documents across my kitchen table, poring over them, trying to find a rational explanation. The more I read, the more confused I became. Elizabeth had been involved in something called the Temporal Society, a group that believed in the possibility of connecting with different time periods. Over the next few days, I threw myself into research. I visited the city archives, scoured online genealogy databases, and even reached out to distant relatives. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Elizabeth hadn't just been my look-alike. She was my great-great-grandmother. She had survived the 1906 earthquake, but disappeared mysteriously a few years later. As I dug deeper, strange things began to happen. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I'd heard someone calling my name. Objects in my apartment would be slightly out of place, as if someone had been moving them. Once, I could have sworn I saw a figure in old-fashioned dress disappearing around a corner at the grocery store. A week after my discovery in the attic, I received a letter. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed with age. Inside was a note dated 1910, in Elizabeth's handwriting. It read, "To my future self, we've done it. The connection is made. Be ready." I sat there, staring at the letter, my mind reeling. How was this possible? Had Elizabeth somehow known I would find these things? Was she trying to communicate across time itself? That night, as I lay in bed, tossing and turning, I heard it again, that whisper of my name. But this time, it was followed by words that made my blood run cold. "Sarah, we're running out of time. You need to finish what I started." I sat up, my eyes wide in the darkness. In the mirror across from my bed, I saw a flicker of movement. For just a second, I could have sworn I saw Elizabeth's face superimposed over my own, her eyes pleading, desperate. As the image faded, I was left with a growing sense of dread. Whatever Elizabeth had been involved in, whatever she had started, it wasn't over. And somehow, across the span of a century, she was reaching out to me to complete it. I didn't know what to do, who to turn to. How could I explain any of this without sounding completely insane? But as I sat there in the dark, one thing became crystal clear. My life had become intertwined with Elizabeth's in ways I couldn't begin to understand. And whatever journey she had begun all those years ago, it was now up to me to see it through. The next morning, I returned to Gran's house, determined to uncover the truth. As I climbed the stairs to the attic, each step creaking ominously, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far bigger than I could imagine. Whatever secrets lay hidden in this old house, whatever connection existed between Elizabeth and me, I was about to find out. And I had a sinking feeling that once I did, nothing would ever be the same again. Thank you for listening. Now try to sleep.